Okay, so I want to make a video to a video posted by someone called Anonymous. They have the official Anonymous sort of logo, like the male figure with the globe thing. But the problem with Anonymous is it's very hard to say which is the real Anonymous and which isn't. So for the purpose of this video, I'll just say a user calling themselves Anonymous. Anyway, in the video there is a group of Muslim men somewhere in London. I don't know whereabouts. It was uploaded on the 8th of January this year, so I'm not sure when exactly the footage is from. Could be from last year, but it was uploaded anyway on the 8th of January. Anyway, basically the police are speaking to these guys because members of the public had raised concern that they were seen in the park waving the ISIS flag, which of course is the black Islamist flag. That's the flag that ISIS have adopted. Anyway, basically their attitude from the outset is very mouthy, very arrogant, very we done nothing, and sort of almost more like a gang than a political group. Now, whether they are specifically members of Daesh, the organization, I don't know. They're certainly pro-Islamist. You can tell that by the rhetoric, um, because they go on to sort of justify the Islamic flag. Now, anyone who waves the Islamic flag is guilty of politicizing Islam. There's no question about that. And law abiding, reasonable Muslims do not do that. So these guys, even if they're not Daesh, they are Islamists, which in my mind makes them scumbags. I believe Islamism is no different from fascism or other totalitarian ideologies. Um, Anyway, they're going on and on about their rights and saying the British flag offends them and they should speak to the police every time they see the British flag. And they were talking about white supremacy. But the thing is, in this country, we do have rules, laws against extremism in all its forms. So that kind of knocks their point flat. Um, anyway, I can go back and forth about what most people can already see that these guys don't warrant much sympathy. From the video, there weren't any arrests made. The police spoke to them. They didn't have any flag, and no more action was taken. Now, to me, mine that is just based on this video. I don't know if the police took that further. I do believe strongly that for a very long time, um, certainly leading up to the 7/7 attacks, I don't want to accuse the police of complacency, but the truth is their hands were tied. I think one of the problems in liberal democracies is that the Islamists kind of use our tolerance against us. So whenever there is any perceived notion that we take action against them, they kind of shout and rave about free speech and about their rights. Needless to say, if their ideology was imposed, none of the rest of us would have rights. So all non-Muslims would have no rights under their ideology, and any Muslim who doesn't subscribe to their particular sectarian brand of theology wouldn't be tolerated in their perverse sort of society. I have to admit, when I see things like this, it does make my blood boil because it's just a case of our tolerance kind of being used against us. And I do think that we need to think very, very carefully about this because the one size fits all logic when it comes to issues like free speech can maybe be naive at times. I do believe that we need legislation to give the police powers to act against Islamists because, you know, they're gathering in a park one day, they're planning a terrorist attack the next month. Of course, they're going to say to the police that they're not ISIS because these people aren't stupid. They know how to be manipulative and they know how to talk their way out of anything. But it sickens me to see this. And it sickens me that you can have hate preachers in the streets of London preaching hatred against Jews, preaching hatred against homosexuals, preaching hatred against non Muslims. and there is only a limit on how much the police can actually do. We do have legislation in place against hate speech, I think. I'm not 100% sure about that. I need to do my homework perhaps, but I am convinced that are not, we do not have enough in place to fight back. And this isn't just a British problem, it's a Europe-wide problem. I think one reason why the United States hasn't had the same level of Islamist infiltration is because, for the most part, they take integration a lot more seriously. The problem in Britain for too long is that we have seen integration as a dirty concept, and the regressive left have been guilty of turning it into a dirty concept. The idea that if you demand integration, that's somehow racist. Um, and this isn't to say that the problem just lies with migrants, because there are British born Islamists. In fact, some of the worst Islamists are converts. So it isn't just about integration, although that's an important issue. It's also about saying this perverse ideology needs to be absolutely crushed. It's no different from fascism. And like I say, these people will argue their way out of a paper bag. They'll always have answers. They'll always try and turn it around. And it's this victimhood culture that they have. Um, the police need to be given the power to arrest these bastards. As far as I'm concerned, waving the Islamic flag should be an arrestable offence, whether it's specifically Daesh or not. As far as I'm concerned, political Islam should be seriously an area that is prescribed, because you cannot have political Islam, that is to say, Islamic supremacy. That's basically what it is. That doesn't veer towards a sort of totalitarian theological supremacy that Islamists come out with. The way I see it is, a truly moderate Muslim is a Muslim who practices their faith, who gets on with their day, goes to the mosque, but who doesn't try to impose Islam onto wider society. As soon as someone does that, that's the problem. And I say the same thing for other religions, but frankly, we're not seeing the same level of problems from other religions. That's why there's a focus on Islam. And just a point, since I'm on this subject, apparently there's been 37,000 complaints about the new um, dark comedy sketch, Housewives of ISIS. Now, I haven't seen it, so I can't comment too much about the program itself, although I've seen clips of it. Basically, it's dark comedy about it's making fun of these jihadist women that have these notions of going to Syria as martyrs. It is risky humor. It's very politically incorrect, very edgy. Um, I know a left-wing Muslim woman who has defended this as being very witty, and there are actually Muslims defending it because it is clever satire. I think the people who are defending it are contradicting themselves, because the very same people would say Islam has nothing to do with terrorism. Now, if that's the case, why are they getting offended by this show? Because the show isn't about Muslims, it's about Islamists, it's about jihadists going to Syria. So why are they getting offended? If Islam has nothing to do with terrorism, why are they getting offended by this show? Think about it. It's a contradiction in their position. Um, so I really do think that we have a lot of questions to ask when it comes to tackling extremism in this country. And I think part of the problem is the left is so obsessed by the extremism posed by the hard right. And I do believe there is a problem there. You know, I'm not underplaying that. As a centrist, I call out extremism in all its forms. So, sure, there are lone wolf Anders Breivik types out there, like the guy who assassinated Joe Cox. So there is a problem from the far right. But the problem is that the left obsess over that. And I do believe that they hugely underestimate the threat posed by radical Islamists. Um, and the truth is, we cannot take our ball off any form of extremism. So It is absolutely right that the police pursued this, but I'm disconcerted by the fact that after speaking to these guys for about 5 minutes, they basically seem to just leave it at that. And I'm not, pointing fingers at the police. They may well be restrained in what they actually can do. There needs to be power given to the police to make arrests. So I think the police should have the power to hold these guys, to investigate what their allegiances are, interview them separately. And the thing is, the way Islamists are trained among themselves is actually highly sophisticated. In most cases, there's a few exceptions, but in most cases, these people are very smart. Like I say, they can talk their way out of anything. So that smugness, the police need to be equipped to deal with that. What I saw there was very patient officers trying their best to do their job, but it looked to me like they had their hands tied. And I'll try and put a link in this video. Incidentally, there was a video I watched just before that about a Dutch national who was born in Afghanistan, who had served time in the Netherlands for murder, actually attacked police in Crawley in West Sussex with a claw hammer. And he's been jailed for life. I hope that's a whole life tariff. Someone like that should never be released. And it's not directly related to the issue of Islamism because, on one hand we're talking about a murderer, on the other hand we're talking about potential terrorists, would be mass murder. But it comes down to the general point of giving police power. Now, I've always been consistent where the police have crossed the line. I've criticised that, and I will stand by that. If the police abuse someone, if they cross a line and they do something that is excessive, that's wrong. And police officers should be subject to the law like everyone else. However, because of this atmosphere that we are living in, because there's a very real threat, the police need to be given the power to act. And I think the regular Jills and Joes of the public need to have some understanding of what these people face on a daily basis. We also need to have an appreciation of what the security services do. In some ways, they're unsung heroes because the number of terrorist attacks that have been prevented by the security services, we will never even know. That's potentially thousands upon thousands of lives saved by men and women who will never be famous and who will never be publicly thanked. So I think we need to bear that in mind. But just looking at the cockiness of these guys, frankly, makes me sick. And it should bother any decent person, whether you're Muslim or not. These guys are living in the UK. I don't know if they're born in the UK or not. And that's sometimes a mistake that the far right use. They always assume it's migrants. Not always. Sometimes they're British born Islamists. The mentality that these guys have, the arrogance, the cockiness, the victimhood mentality, the police need to be equipped to say, shut up, I'm an officer, and you're going to answer these questions. It shouldn't be a case that they have this ability to just get cocky and keep answering back. I do believe in due process, but we have to be realistic as to what this threat is. And I really do think that, the very same people would say freedom of speech go to hell. And yet these cards, these hypocrites, would hide behind freedom of speech to do what they're doing. That's what's so disgusting about Islamists. They attack Western values, and yet they use Western values to protect them. That's why we need to fight back. We need to really, really, really get a grip on this. And we need to show Islamists that we will take action. I really, really believe that. And the answer is not to demonize all Muslims. It's not to pander to those neo-nationalist, white supremacist, blood and soil morons, because as far as I'm concerned, they don't help anyone. It's to just use common sense. And the government needs to really, really push this. Now, to be fair to Theresa May, she was a Home Secretary that got rid of Abu Qatada. So I'm relatively confident that she takes this issue seriously enough. But, one person, whether she's the Prime Minister or not, cannot do everything. I think this is collective responsibility, and the public have a responsibility to acknowledge that there is a problem. So these people need to be isolated. And frankly, the wider Muslim community has a responsibility to be honest about the problem. Because it isn't a case of saying that all Muslims are like this. We know that. It's a case of acknowledging some Muslims are like this. Because saying they've got nothing to do with Islam isn't going to solve the problem. You wouldn't put out a fire with a little sprinkler. So you have to acknowledge what the problem is. And I do believe the police need to be given more powers. In that situation, what I believe should have happened is the police should have arrested them individually, brought them to separate cells, questioned them individually, and looked into their individual backgrounds one by one, no matter how exhaustive it would be, because we're talking about the difference possibly between life and death. It shouldn't be a case the police confront them and then they just make excuses and get all mouthy, and that's it. Now, I don't know what the follow up was, but it looked to me like the police just kind of went away. And like I say, I'm not blaming the officers for that. Their hands are probably tied. But the police need to be given the power to take this thing seriously. So I hope Amber Rudd really gives them that power. For my international viewers, she's our new Home Secretary. In other words, the minister responsible for these very important matters of counter-terrorism and domestic security. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. But seeing this in our capital city, it frankly makes me sick that people can openly say that they find the British flag offensive, but they're going to fly a political symbol that is pro-terrorism, and no one can try and argue that the Islamic flag is anything but pro-terrorism, because even if it's not used by Daesh, it's used by Al-Shabaab, it's used by Boko Haram. No one can argue against that. So we'll leave it there, but yeah, I really think the police need to be given power in these situations. I am not saying that the police should be able to do whatever they want. That's a different matter. And we have to be very, very careful that when, that the balance is right. But the police do a very difficult job, and they need to be given the power to do their job. Where officers do cross the line, those individuals should be held responsible. But I really do think that's a different issue. The only reason I'm mentioning that is some people were saying, oh, in America they'd pump them with lead and this sort of thing. I don't particularly want to go down that avenue because look at the problems the US is facing with the mistrust between the police and the public. And there has been a lot of incidents that simply cannot be justified. So it has to be a case of giving the police power. I do believe, by the way, that police should be armed in bigger cities. I do believe that. But they need to be trained to know when to use those arms. So these issues are not simple, but it is essential that we get it right.